More than 20,000 Russian troops killed since December. AI godfather Geoffrey Hinton warns of dangers as he quits Google. Sudan fighting in its 19th day. The coronation of King Charles. Israel bombs Gaza as tensions rise over death of Kader Adnan. And more news to follow. Hello and welcome to the Global Utopia Informate. I am your host Ann Bot. Little Monster with the top 10 selected news of the week around the globe. Let's start with the foremost topic. The Ukraine War. Courtesy BBC News. Reported by George Wright. The headline quotes, "More than 20,000 Russian troops killed since December," US says. Now let's understand the situation. According to the National Security Council spokesman John Kirby, citing newly declassified intelligence said, more than 20,000 Russian soldiers have been killed in fighting in Ukraine since December, and a further 80,000 have been wounded. Half of the dead are from the Wagner mercenary company, who have been attacking the eastern Bakhmut city. Moscow currently holds most of Bakhmut, but Ukrainian troops still control a small portion of the city. In the west, the fierce battle has taken on huge symbolic importance for both sides. Mr. Kirby told reporters, Russia's attempt at an offensive in the Donbass region, largely through Bakhmut, has failed, and Russia has been unable to seize any real strategic and significant territory. The bottom line is that Russia's attempted offensive strategy has backfired, after months of fighting with extraordinary losses. According to the analysts, Bakhmut has little strategic value, but has become a focal point for Russian commanders, who have struggled to deliver any positive news to the Kremlin. The Wagner mercenary group, which widely uses convicts, and has become notorious for its often inhumane methods, has taken center stage in the Russian assault on Bakhmut. But the leader of the Wagner mercenary group has recently threatened to pull his troops out of Bakhmut if they were not provided with much-needed ammunition by the Russian Defense Ministry. According to Gen. Alexander Syrsky, the commander of Ukraine's ground forces, new Russian units, including paratroopers and fighters from Wagner, are being constantly thrown into battle, despite taking heavy losses. Moving on to the next news headlines. AI godfather Geoffrey Hinton warns of dangers as he quits Google. Courtesy BBC News. As reported by Zoe Kleinman and Chris Valance. A warning. AI chatbots may soon be more intelligent than us. A man widely seen as the godfather of artificial intelligence, AI, has quit his job, warning about the growing dangers from developments in the field of AI intelligence. But he also accepted that his age had played into his decision to leave the tech giant. In a statement to the New York Times, Hinton says he now regretted his work. He told the BBC, "Some of the dangers of AI chatbots were quite scary." Dr. Hinton's pioneering research on neural networks and deep learning has paved the way for current AI systems like ChatGPT. In artificial intelligence, neural networks are systems that are similar to the human brain in the way they learn and process information. They enable AIs to learn from experience, as a person would. This is called deep learning. The British-Canadian cognitive psychologist and computer scientist told the BBC that chatbots could soon overtake the level of information that a human brain holds. And given the rate of progress, we expect things to get better quite fast. So, we need to worry about that. Dr. Hinton says, "We're biological systems and these are digital systems. And the big difference is that, with digital systems, you have many copies of the same set of weights, with the same model of the world. So, it's as if you had 10,000 people, and whenever one person learned something, everybody automatically knew it. And that's how these chatbots can know so much more than any one person." In March, an open letter, co-signed by dozens of people in the AI field, including the tech billionaire Elon Musk, called for a pause on all developments more advanced than the current version of AI chatbot ChatGPT, so that a robust safety measures could be designed and implemented. Yoshua Benjo, another so-called godfather of AI, also signed the letter. Even Google boss Sundar Pichai said in a recent interview that, even he did not fully understand everything that its AI chatbot, Bard, did. Make no mistake, we are on a speeding train right now, and the concern is that one day it will start building its own tracks. And the fun part, excuse me. This whole video is made on an AI platform, and I am your host, Little Monster, an AI biotech. Rise and shine.
Moving on to the third news headlines. Sudan fighting in its 21st day. A list of key events and proceedings. News courtesy Al Jazeera News. More than 100,000 people have fled Sudan since heavy fighting broke out between rival forces on April 15th. So what's happening in Sudan now? First, Sudan's warring military factions agreed to a new and longer 7-day ceasefire from Thursday. Second, South Sudan's foreign ministry said in a statement that mediation championed by President Salva Kiir led both sides to agree on a week-long truce and to name envoys for peace talks. Third, air raids and shooting in the Khartoum capital region undercut their latest supposed truce. Witnesses reported renewed air attacks and anti-aircraft fire in the capital on Tuesday. Fourth, beyond Khartoum, lawlessness has engulfed the Darfur region, from where more than 70% of the 330,000 people displaced inside Sudan by the fighting have fled. Fifth, according to local reports in El Janina, in the capital of West Darfur, there was a return to some semblance of normalcy, as markets reopen and residents cautiously go about their lives. So how is the humanitarian situation out there? Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, or MSF, said it had delivered some aid to Khartoum from Port Sudan, a road journey of about 800 kilometers. Sudan's health ministry reported on Tuesday that 550 people have died and 4,926 injured in the fighting so far. A Sudanese physician, Haida El Hassan, posted a video on social media of medical staff struggling to cope with a surge of wounded civilians at a hospital in Khartoum's East Nile neighborhood. So what are the diplomacy and evacuation plans? Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi said in an interview that the entire region could be affected. The UN head of mission, Volker Perthes, said discussions involving Saudi and U.S. mediators were underway, with the rival generals to firm up a truce.
Moving on to the fourth news headlines. Catastrophic drought that's pushed millions into crisis. Made 100 times more likely by climate change. Analysis finds. Courtesy CNN News. By Laura Pattison. The unrelenting drought that has devastated the Horn of Africa and left more than 20 million people facing acute food insecurity would not have been possible without climate change, a new analysis has found. Since October 2020, this part of East Africa, one of the world's most impoverished regions, has been gripped by its worst drought in 40 years, as an unprecedented 5 consecutive rainy seasons have failed. The drought has brought catastrophic impacts to large areas of Kenya, Somalia, and Ethiopia. Tens of thousands have died. Crops have shriveled. Livestock have starved, and chronic hunger and water insecurity are widespread and growing. The planet's average temperature is now around 1.2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels of the late 1800s. And scientists say droughts will only become more severe if the world continues to burn fossil fuels. Regions that are already vulnerable face the worst impacts. Much of the population in the region are farmers that rely on rainfall for crops and livestock. At least 8 million farm animals are estimated to have died during the drought. Around 1.7 million people in Ethiopia and Somalia have had to leave their homes because of the impacts of the drought, and more than 20 million people in the Horn of Africa have been pushed into crisis levels of food insecurity, or worse, according to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. In Somalia, which has been teetering on the edge of famine, more than 43,000 people are estimated to have been killed by the drought, half of whom were children under 5 years old. As the world continues to warm, we expect to see the combined effect of low precipitation with high temperatures causing really exceptional droughts in this part of the world, said Joyce Kimutai, a climate scientist.
Moving on to the fifth headlines. A synopsis guide to King Charles III. Coronation and key times. Courtesy BBC News by the visual journalism team. Millions of people across the UK and beyond are preparing to celebrate the coronation of King Charles III, a symbolic ceremony combining a religious service and pageantry. It is being held at Westminster Abbey on May 6 and the King, who will be crowned along with Camilla, the Queen Consort, will be the 40th reigning monarch crowned there since 1066 AD. The procession will set off from Buckingham Palace at 10:20 British Summer Time, to the Great West Door of Westminster Abbey. King Charles will enter through the Great West Door and will be preceded by processions made up of faith leaders, representatives of Commonwealth countries, Governors-General and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. The ceremony is due to begin at 11 o'clock British Summer Time, and the King's grandson, Prince George, will be among the pages at Westminster Abbey, alongside Camilla's grandchildren, Lola, Eliza, Gus, Louis and Freddie. Stage 1, the recognition. King Charles will be presented to the people, a tradition dating back to Anglo-Saxon times. Archbishop of Canterbury Justin Welby will make the first declaration. Stage 2, the oath. The Archbishop of Canterbury will then administer the coronation oath, a legal requirement. Stage 3, the anointing. The king's ceremonial robe will be removed and he will sit in the coronation chair to be anointed, emphasizing the spiritual status of the sovereign who is also the head of the Church of England. Stage 4, the investiture, literally the crowning moment, when the king will wear St. Edward's crown for the only time in his life. Stage 5, the enthronement. The final part of the ceremony will see the king take the throne. The Queen Consort. After the homage, Queen Camilla will be anointed, crowned and enthroned in a simpler ceremony. Communion. The final part of the service will see the king and queen taking Holy Communion, the principal act of worship of the Christian Church. The departure. The king and queen consort will descend from their thrones and enter St. Edward's Chapel behind the high altar. The king and queen consort will then return to Buckingham Palace along the reverse of the route by which they came.
Up next to the sixth headlines. With Zelensky call, Xi Jinping steps up bid to broker peace. But does he have a plan? Courtesy CNN. An analysis by Simone McCarthy. A long-awaited phone call between Chinese leader Xi Jinping and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Wednesday has received a tentative welcome in Washington and parts of Europe for its potential to increase dialogue toward resolving Russia's brutal war in Ukraine. It also marks the most concrete step made to date by China to take up the role of mediator. But the hour-long conversation, believed to be the first between the two leaders, also comes with few tangible proposals for how China might help to bridge the devastating, war-torn divide between the two countries. And its timing, at a moment when Beijing is acutely focused on strengthening ties with Europe, amid cratering relations with the United States. Ties have been frayed thin since the outbreak of the war, as European leaders have watched in dismay while Beijing refused to condemn the invasion and instead bolstered its economic and diplomatic ties with Moscow, including joining the Kremlin in blaming NATO for fueling the conflict. Zelensky, who had for months expressed interest in speaking with Xi, addressed hopes for China's role in peace after the call. Xi, for his part, pledged China would not sit idly by, and planned to dispatch a special envoy to push forward communication with all parties toward peace talks. but what exactly China could or hopes to achieve remains far from clear. According to Yun Sun, the director of the China program at the Washington think tank center, China's move to call Zelensky now may be more a bid to capitalize on French support for its mediator role after a recent visit from French President Emmanuel Macron to China and to win any benefits from Europe. But another set of optics, Beijing's close rapport with Moscow, has already embedded a deep skepticism in the West over China's potential role as mediator. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, she has claimed China's neutrality, but has spoken with Putin 5 times, including twice in person, without picking up the phone to call Zelensky. But this rapport has also been the reason that some leaders, including Zelensky and Macron, have expressed hope that she could leverage his clout to influence Russia to respect international law.
Moving on to the 7th headlines. Afghanistan. Nothing we can do but watch babies die. Courtesy BBC News. By Yogita Lamai. A 3-month-old boy is quiet and motionless. His mother moves the oxygen pipe away from his nose and puts a finger below his nostrils to check if she can feel him breathing. She begins to cry as she realizes her son is fading. At this hospital in Afghanistan, there is not a single working ventilator. Every day, 167 children die in Afghanistan from preventable diseases, according to the UN Children's Fund UNICEF, illnesses that could and should be cured with the right medication. Multiple rooms are full of sick children, at least 2 in each bed, their little bodies ravaged by pneumonia. Just 2 nurses look after 60 children. In one room, there are at least 24 babies who appear to be in a serious condition. Yet, for the million people who live in Gore, this basic facility is still the best-equipped public hospital they can access. Public healthcare in Afghanistan has never been adequate, and foreign money which almost entirely funded it was frozen in August 2021 when the Taliban seized power. Over the past 20 months, the hospitals and clinics across the country has been collapsing. Now the Taliban's recent ban on women working for NGOs means it's becoming harder for humanitarian agencies to operate, putting even more children and babies at risk. According to a nursing staff, "We don't have equipment and there is lack of staff, especially female staff. There is a huge shortage of oxygen. The oxygen production unit at the hospital isn't able to produce sufficient oxygen. It's a feeling of exhaustion and agony." What is being witnessed by the people of Gore raises serious questions about why public healthcare in Afghanistan is crumbling so quickly, when billions of dollars were poured into it by the international community for 20 years until 2021. Where was that money spent, if a provincial hospital doesn't have a single ventilator for its patients? Only 5% of the UN's appeal for Afghanistan has been funded so far. Currently there is a stopgap arrangement in place. Because money can't be given directly to the internationally unrecognized Taliban government. Humanitarian agencies have stepped in to fund salaries of medical staff and the cost of medicines and food that are just about keeping hospitals like the one in Gore running.
On to the 8th headlines. Callistan. The outlawed Sikh separatist movement that has Indian authorities on edge. Courtesy CNN News. Report by Ria Moghul. A colossal police hunt for a Sikh separatist who has revived calls for an independent homeland in India's Punjab state has stoked fears of violence and revived painful memories of a bloody insurgency that killed thousands. Amritpal Singh, 30, has been on the run since March 18 after he was accused by police of attempted murder, obstruction of law enforcement and creating disharmony in society. More than 100 people have been arrested so far and authorities blocked mobile internet access for the entire state to prevent any incitement to violence, forcing about 27 million offline in one of the country's most extensive blackouts in recent years. Who is Amritpal Singh? The controversial self-styled preacher was relatively unknown until the death of actor and activist Deep Sidhu last year. Sidhu backed the country's year-long farmers' movement and founded Waris Punjab Da, a group established to protect Sikh rights. When Sidhu was killed in a car crash in February 2022, Amritpal Singh took over the reins, leading marches and giving impassioned, often provocative, speeches, building a large following and gaining popularity. Singh has likened himself to Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale, a a leading figure of the Callistan movement who was killed by the Indian Army in 1984. What is the Callistan movement? In very short verse, the Sikh religion was founded in the Punjab in the 15th century by Guru Nanak and has about 25 million followers worldwide. The origins of the modern Callistan movement trace back to around the time of India's independence from Britain in 1947, when some Sikhs demanded that a nation be carved in the state of Punjab for followers of the faith. But when the Indian subcontinent won its independence, the bloody partition hastily divided the former colony along religious lines, sending Muslims to the newly formed nation of Pakistan, and Hindus and Sikhs to newly independent India. The Callistan movement was lost somewhere in time, but the Callistan supporters remain fringe and on the margins. Why is there support for Callistan outside of India? The Callistan movement is outlawed in India and considered a grave national security threat by the government. A number of groups associated with the movement are listed as terrorist organizations under India's Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. But it continues to evoke a level of sympathy from some Sikhs, particularly in Canada, Britain, and Australia. Indian consulates in the United Kingdom and the United States have been vandalized by Singh supporters who tore down the Indian flag, replacing it with the Callistan emblem. A small but influential number of those Sikhs support the idea of Callistan, with referendums periodically held to reach a consensus to establish a separate homeland within India. According to Ashutosh Kumar, a professor at Punjab University, said that, perhaps the reason for this support overseas is because the diaspora are looking for their roots.
Moving on to the 9th headlines. Israel bombs Gaza as tensions rise over death of Qadir Adnan. Courtesy Al Jazeera News. Israeli jets carried out airstrikes in Gaza late on Tuesday, with loud explosions heard in the besieged coastal enclave as tension escalated over the death of a prominent Palestinian prisoner in Israeli custody following an 87-day hunger strike. The Israeli bombing comes after rockets were fired from the Gaza Strip following the death of Qadir Adnan earlier on Tuesday. Hamas media said Israeli planes hit 2 locations in Gaza City. Adnan, who was awaiting trial, was found unconscious in his cell and taken to a hospital, where he was declared dead after efforts to revive him, Israel's prison service said on Tuesday. Hundreds of people took to the streets in blockaded Gaza and the occupied West Bank to rally in support of Adnan and mourn his death, which Palestinian leaders described as an assassination. An umbrella group of armed Palestinian factions, including Hamas and Islamic Jihad, claimed responsibility for rocket barrages towards Israel. In the West Bank city of Hebron, shops observed a general strike. Some protesters burned tires and hurled stones at Israeli soldiers who fired tear gas and rubber bullets at them. In a tweet, Israel's defense minister Yoav Gallant said the security establishment will act with determination and force against those who harm the country. Mustafa Barghouti, General Secretary of the Palestinian National Initiative, PNI, called the death of Qadir Adnan an ugly assassination, whose purpose is to break the spirit of resistance that Palestinian prisoners have. It is a complete mockery of international human rights law, Barghouti said. Adnan's lawyer Jamil al-Khatib and a doctor with a human rights group who recently met him accused Israeli authorities of withholding medical care.
Moving on to the 10th and last headlines of the week. New World Disorder. China-Russia bloc shores up influence as countries eager to join, including U.S. allies. Courtesy Fox News by Peter Aitken. The China and Russia-led BRICS economic bloc has received membership applications from 19 countries ahead of a June summit, potentially expanding the group's influence throughout the Middle East and Africa. The group, originally comprised of Brazil, Russia, India and China, was referred to as BRIC by Goldman Sachs in 2001 before adding South Africa in 2010. An economist had labeled the countries as the fastest-growing economies that would collectively dominate global commerce by 2050, and the group is looking to capitalize on that potential with an expansion. The bloc eventually agreed to review candidates, prompting applications from across the Middle East and Africa. Aspiring members include Saudi Arabia and Iran, as well as Egypt, Bahrain, Algeria, 2 nations from East Africa and another from West Africa, which remain unidentified at this time. Other applicants include Argentina and Indonesia, indicating the truly global reach that BRICS has aimed to achieve. The group also had explored the potential for a common currency among its members in a move that would directly challenge and weaken the dollar's strength internationally, Foreign Policy reported. Joseph W. Sullivan, a former special advisor during the Trump administration, wrote that the BRICS-backed currency really could dislodge the US dollar as the reserve currency for its members and, actually, has potential to usurp, or at least shake, the dollar's strength. The United Nations did not respond to a Fox News digital request for comment.
Other noted headlines of the week that just missed the list but need special mention around the headlines. 1. The United States and the United Kingdom have long enjoyed what Winston Churchill dubbed a special relationship, yet no U.S. president has ever attended a royal coronation. Does this tradition point to an underlying antagonism between the two nations, or something more mundane? The question is why U.S. presidents skip British coronation. 2. Argentina's inflation rate has soared past 100% for the first time since the end of hyperinflation in the early 90s. Zimbabwe's sky-high inflation is also a huge concern for the people living in the country. 3. Fong Bin. China COVID whistleblower returns home to Wuhan after jail. 4. Hisham Abdulaziz, an Al Jazeera journalist, has been freed in Egypt for years after he was arrested, the Qatari media organization says. 5. Turkish forces have killed the suspected leader of the Islamic State, IS, group in Syria, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has announced. 6. Argentina captain Lionel Messi has been suspended by Paris Saint-Germain for 2 weeks after traveling to Saudi Arabia without the club's permission this week. 7. 7 bodies have been found on a property in Henrietta, a small town in rural Oklahoma, during a search for 2 missing teenagers. 8. Cuba's communist government has cancelled Monday's traditional May Day parade because of acute fuel shortages. 9. France protests, more than 100 police hurt in May Day demonstrations. At least 108 police officers have been injured in clashes across France with protesters angry at pension reforms, the Interior Minister has said. 10. Australia to ban recreational vaping in major public health move. Recreational vaping will be banned in Australia, as part of a major crackdown amid what experts say is an epidemic. If you liked the channel, please like and subscribe, and share it with your family and friends for more of world news and information and other interesting stuffs. This is all for the day. Thank you. And have a nice day ahead.